If our architecture is capable of making the experience of nature in the build more interesting to somehow enhance this experience, then for us it's very important.
Every detail that makes you experience nature in a building is, I think, for us a favorite detail.
My name is Liene Jākobsone.
And I am Manten Devriendt.
And together we are Sampling Architects.
What inspires us as architects is the history of architecture and the everyday life of the city. Walking and moving through the city gives us a lot of information that we use in our work.
And generally observing life and trying to influence it by our work. For me, the idea of leaving something of your own behind in this world is very inspiring. I like the idea of influencing the way people live, the way they interact with each other is very inspiring.
Architecture in general is a very responsible job. So everything that we do or design leaves traces, and that's a really inspiring thing, because you are part of the well-being of everyone. Well, that's a kind of easy question, because we try to be honest in all kind of meanings. Can be in the materiality, can be in the narrative, can be in the beauty of making a building. So we try to be as honest as possible with what we are doing. In that sense, we try to make something very inspiring.
Also, the idea of making something new that hasn't been there before is an important thing. Being part of some sort of a greater movement in architecture that started a long time ago in history and that is heading towards something, and then us being part of this and contributing to this new.
Every detail that makes you experience nature in a building is, I think, for us a favorite detail. So we don't have our most favorite detail, but all the details we have been making until now are maybe our favorite details. And it can be also a very small thing, in the sense that even if we see how water is falling down from a building, that could be a source of making a detail. So we try to make this kind of experience more visible through the detail.
Details are those parts of architecture that are sort of interfaces between the user and the build. So that's where people come in touch, literally, with architecture. And so we try to approach the detail in architecture in that way, and that holds also true for this relationship with nature. So if our architecture is capable of making the experience of nature in the build more interesting to somehow enhance this experience, then for us it's very important.
And that detail is also an element, as Liene is telling, that is kind of connecting this kind of nature feeling to a human feeling. So, for instance, in a project as Augustine's garden, you will see that the windowsill is a very important detail in the project, and it has been kind of a steering element in how we approach the whole environment and the way how the inhabitant will receive his or her space.
And also the rainwater management, so to say, is also an important element in our projects. The way water gets from the roof down to the earth is something that can be designed. There is a whole scenography behind it. We don't treat rainwater as something that has to be just hidden away and drained away. We try to make that part of this experience of the architecture, be it with a visually expressive rain gutters or rainwater collection systems and so on.
And the same counts for the lights. we try to materialize the light in all kind of things. It's not that just making a window, it's like making an opening in a building, connecting one with the other, trying to make this kind of change of the light during the day visible in and outside the building. Well, the same as a detail, no favorite material, but we like to work with the given. If we start with a project, we try to understand the building through its materiality. And we try to understand what can we do with these kind of materials that are already there. But that doesn't mean that we only work with materials that are already there. So we always add as well contemporary materials that sometimes are necessary for keeping the building together.
Well, that in case of a reuse of existing in situations where you work on something that is already given, whereas if you work with something new, then there's a different reasoning behind the material choice. But in any case, we really don't think in terms of favorite materials, because we really believe that any material, be it natural, artificial, has specific characteristics, and that can also be the point of departure, the point of source of inspiration for a project. So, if we would have to tell which is our favorite material, it's a bit like saying which one is your favorite child. So it's a bit of not a question we could respond that way.
Another thing, of course, is also the sustainability. So we look at sustainability maybe in a different way. Of course, we are taking into account the ecological footprint of a material, but it's looking at the lifespan of a building. So sometimes even a material that is less ecological will have a longer lifespan in that sense.
Or also the scale and the other things that determine the context. That really depends whether you're doing some kind of a large-scale development or you're doing a tiny detail in someone's house. So it really determines the material choice. But absolutely, sustainability and the carbon footprint, ecological footprint is something that is really important for us. Yes, but aesthetics, I think that's the main challenge: how you make something aesthetic, inspiring, new, but at the same time also ecological. So that's probably something that we are striving for.
But also with materiality is that we try to research the material as much as possible. So we like to go in depth. Once we find a material really interesting for a project, we try to understand what are the opportunities with this material. So in that sense, once we have the material, then it becomes our favorite material for the project.
Indeed, for a project.
Yeah. Since we are with two partners, I think the discussion is the starting point. Sitting at a table, walking around, discussing about what we could do on how we can understand the brief and react to that. I think that's the starting point.
Yeah, allowing to be inspired by the site, by the client's brief, by the other given conditions, trying to imagine what that specific place and those specific people who will inhabit or use the place, what could we contribute to that? How can we turn it into something better than it is at this moment, regardless whether it's in adaptation of existing building or a newly built. So you always try to understand what can be specific for this site and for this occasion that will make the project meaningful.
And then, of course, we also start with a concept. So we start drawing, sometimes even before going to the site, exchanging thoughts through a sketch, or it can also be a small model. That's a kind of trying to understand what we want to do there. And then next to that, of course, also, as we explained already in other questions, that the material bank, the kind of understanding of what are the the given elements of the site or the given elements of the building.
Yeah, researching the given, really deeply. And also sometimes it's at the beginning of a project, you think back about all the things that you've seen, how we said in the beginning, the history of architecture, this whole amount of information that is in our heads and just waiting to get out and to be realized and to be turned into something new. So sometimes you see the site or you hear the client talking about their needs, and you already see something new that is inspired by things that are already out there in the world, but that you see combined or continued in your way, or in our way in this case, because we really believe that there are many different ways to do architecture, and there is no one correct way, so to say.
And of course, we have our artistic ambition. In any case, it's not that the client will come up with an idea and explain it to us, and we kind of fulfill his or the idea of the client. No, we try to express our artistic ambition, and it can be sometimes a tough discussion with the participators to the let's say the making of the building.
I believe that in the everyday life of an architect, the job of architect, lots of things, I would say 80 to 90% of what we do is not creative. So those are kind of reproductive tasks that need to be accomplished in order to get to the point of having new architecture. And so in that sense, those little moments that you have where you can be creative, where you can actually think of creative things, you are longing for them in your practice. So it's not that you have to necessarily do something specific to fuel your creativity. You actually are waiting for the moment to be able to express that, because as a creative person, I mean, you want to be creating at any given moment, but you also have to do other things in order to get the buildings done.
Yeah, and it's more about sometimes downscaling or having. I mean, if you put too many ideas in a project, it's not gonna be the best project. So you have to be very specific, and then at least for us, there's no problem with fueling.
Well, in this case, the answer is quite easy, because of course it's a project of adaptive reuse. So there is a whole given situation, an existing situation, the built environment, the city, the potential users, the actual neighbors, and so on. And that is all a really powerful source of inspiration in case of this project.
It wasn't a kind of neglected site in a city. It's a backside. The city of Riga has wonderful facades, mostly from the Jugendstil or the Art Nouveau period. Also, our site has this kind of facade and on the street side, so we also did a kind of a small intervention with that one, but that's more like a renovation of what is already there. Also, the site is specific in that sense that it's a working neighborhood of the city, so even the big block had only backside entrances. And then you have this kind of backside that was used in an industrial way.
And so the idea of, you encounter this courtyard, which at that point has never been intended to be representative. It has never been representative or in any case, considered to be beautiful or even considered to be appropriate for residential function at all. And that is very inspiring when you see such a place and against all odds, people don't see it there, but you do see as an architect. And that's, I think, that's something really inspiring, that you have this vision and you do all your efforts to turn this place, to make this huge makeover that at the end makes people really surprised about, wow, how is that even possible? That such a rundown industrial built heritage can be turned into something contemporary, something cozy, something nice, something that people would want to inhabit. In the case of House 61, actually, the materiality is at the core of the architectural concepts. The moment that we chose for concrete as a base material for this building, many things were sort of determined. First of all, we knew that we would want to use concrete not only as a visual or aesthetic solution, but also as a bearing solution construction. So basically it's a bearing structure because we really believe, as you already said before, in honesty of materials. So concrete is one of those materials that is very durable, very sustainable in the sense of being able to last long. And in this case, regardless of the contemporary discourse on the ecological sustainability of concrete, it's a house for one family, so it's a really small building, and we thought that this is the moment where we can use the concrete as a material and create something very sculptural, something very special, and at the same time do actually very little harm, if we can consider it that way, from the ecological point of view.
Concrete being sculptural also helped us to work with the nature, which is like kind of the opposite of what you would expect of the concrete. But the way how with the forms you can control the lights or kind of control also the views from inside to outside, but also from outside to inside, because the house is also situated in a beautiful environment. It's along the coastline in between the pine trees. Also the landscape, which is this kind of micro, hilly, extremely natural environment, comes into the building. So you can step out of the building and you're immediately into the nature. You can pick your berries, pick mushrooms. So the concrete is kind of only the shelter that protects somebody from being inside and outside. And that's why we also played with these kind of huge cantilevers, same size as the openings, that mark, on the one hand, the way of entering to a space, protect yourself from rain or whatever kind of
environmental conditions. Yeah.
The concrete really shaped the space. And I remember the moment when the shadow of the trees was like casted on the concrete, so that suddenly the concrete started to be alive. So it's not a dead material.
This project is very architecturally, it's sort of simple, with flat surfaces, large flat surfaces. But at the same time, it has a very diverse, ingenious details in it. So indeed, the roofs that extend above the entrances for 2 meters long, and the rainwater sprouts that are positioned in strategic points on the building, so that certain spots gain attention. So you can have one simple facade without any opening or anything, but you have this one rainwater gutter, and the nature does its work. So you see, whenever it rains, you see water pouring over, and that is this scenography of nature and architecture that we really enjoy. And actually, that's maybe the reason why this project inspired also dancers and filmmakers, as there was a short film created in this building based on its architecture, where a contemporary dance performance was carried out, and then the film is now to be seen.
On Arte, yeah.
On Arte television, indeed.
And there you also see that they understood this kind of the rhythm of the columns, for instance. They are structural, but in the same time, if you move through the space, you have a completely different feeling than if you're standing in front of the building. So in front of the building, you can look through it, but it also creates this kind of beautiful corridor where the light is falling into.
Yeah, but if you move along this corridor, user, and you look forward, you will not see what's happening inside. And then when you slow down and you look out through those small columns, then all of a sudden you see this picture outside. So that kind of, how the movement in architecture defines also your experience and your perceptions of architecture. And yeah, and this concrete, indeed, like even the details that you see, like really elegant, thin columns, they are indeed load-bearing. So in that sense, we are trying to avoid at all times being decorative. We really believe that, the materials that we use, the shapes that we devise for a building, they need to have some kind of a meaning also beyond the aesthetics. The shapes of the window openings as well, they look nice, but at the same time they also bring in more light from a certain side where the light comes from, the natural light.
And the only thing maybe that is a kind of decorative is that with the concrete is the casting of the concrete. So you have the panels and you have these kind of little dots that are used in fact for keeping the formwork on its place. That's the place where we as architects started to, let's say, play with it. And as you can see also in the building itself, it's not that we use the beautiful concrete panels with the 6 or 4 dots, but we used a very regular kind of system due to the fact that we had to work with not the highest skills concrete people. And in that sense, we really made the drawings as perfect as possible. And sometimes you see that there is an opening, sometimes not. And that's in fact also like the play that we had together with the formwork. So with this building, it was very inspiring to see that before the concrete was there, whilst this formwork structure or sculpture was standing there, you had already an impression of the building, and then suddenly you untake this form and the form appears. And the form is there for the whole time. And then you start in fact with the rest of the building, let's say the insulation part, the vision of the spaces inside. So in that sense, this house was a process in itself.
From our perspective, and that's also something that we have always followed as a principle, be brave, dare to take risks, dare to do something that is special. First of all, architecture is a slow process. As an architect, within your life, you will not have too many opportunities to do something because it really is slow to design and to build something. So in that sense, we really think that we do it ourselves, but also young architects that are ambitious should carefully consider where they put their effort, that they not to do things that where you see that you will not be able to achieve the best result. Really invest your effort there where you see that there is a fruitful ground where you could actually realize something special, where there are people who understand what you're doing. And so don't lose yourself in compromises. That's something really, really important for us. The fact that you, at the end, are really 100% behind that built work, that you can really respond about every detail and anything, and you're proud of it. I think that's like the ambition that we have, and we really recommend that to young architects as well. Yeah,
because we see that taking a risk is not easy at all. It's even taught at schools that maybe you have to be careful of taking risks with it, which is a pity, because as we have been seeing in the past, in the history, good architecture, or let's say architecture that stayed, is architecture that took risks.
Yeah, and risks in the sense not of, of course, putting someone in danger or so. When we talk about taking risks in architecture, we mostly mean by that trying to do something different, trying to do something that hasn't been done before, also in terms of aesthetics, for example, because, often people just think of risking in the sense of doing some complicated constructions and in that sense, but also daring to do and to propose a different aesthetic is risky, especially in a case of a commercial brief where you have a client whose profit depends on your work. But that is exactly where you can make, sort of say, the difference, where you can make history. Because history is a continuous movement, continuous change, and that is what is interesting. That is why we study history, why we find it interesting, because it's not all the time the same thing. And so in that sense, we really encourage also other architects to be more daring in exploring the new.
Yeah, that's what we see in both projects we described in this talk, that the Augustine's garden or the house, both were projects that when we started with the initial concept, it was not that the client was like, yes, let's go for it. We took a lot of risk.
Because the client were not always even able to imagine what we had in our minds. And since we deliberately choose oftentimes not to work with visualizations, with renders and so, but rather use some low-res tools such as working models in different materials that do not necessarily represent the end result in a really understandable way for someone who is not used in reading such tools or doing sketches, really low-risk sketches with pencils.
Or, for instance, the whole story about the colors. Yeah, in one country it's accepted, in another country it's not accepted. So it's not that that it's an easy job. So in that sense, if you want to get somewhere, we have to do it. Otherwise, we will end up with one and the same, as we also see in architecture in general. There is some kind of a common understanding of what an architect should be, and that's
sort of
definitely
a standard of taste, so to say, and
but that's
people
not
follow.
what we want to do. I mean, we want to make the difference.
In the meantime, it's very important, and that could also be part of the advice to young architects, is really to follow others, to follow your peers, younger or older, doesn't matter, but the architects, the contemporary architectural community, and to see who's doing things that inspire you and trying to be part of the movement, not being isolated from others, not trying to necessarily be original per se, but try to be contributing even a little something to that movement that others are also part of. So really being part of a nice community that together form this critical mass that create contemporary architecture of value.
Because it's needed nowadays.
Yeah, and always.